Chapter 3. The desert shone like a great ball of silver fire, casting the light of moons and stars in fantastic reflection across the horizon. Great spires of crystal, tall as mountains and sharp as knives, scratched at the sky, their smooth skins of glass shining in the dark. No product of a sane world, the spires were things more akin to trees than rocks, growing with the seasons, sprouting jagged offspring that would ooze from their sides until gravity broke them free. The spires rose from the floor of a great bowl like depression. The basin was littered with shimmering dust left behind by falling crystals, saturating the ground with a layer of shard like ash. No tree or bush, not even the most desperate of weed or rugged cactus, grew in the desolation beneath the spires. No plant could thrive in the glassy ground, and nothing could endure the hideous heat that infested the basin as sunlight was magnified and twisted by the reflective crystal peaks. Yet there was still life in the desert of mirrors, a corrupt, abominable breed of life. In caverns deep beneath the blazing shard sand, things crept and slithered, hiding from the hateful day. In the warmth of night, as the crystals surrendered the heat they had absorbed from the sun, these creatures abandoned their troglodyte existence, emerging upon the desert floor to prowl and hunt and kill. The nocturnal creatures were strange and abhorrent, grisly in form and mien, but they were none so vile as those that clung to the shape of man. Their burrows beneath the shard sand were little better than those of beasts, earthen tunnels that chewed into the earth by the ruddiest of tools. Bones and debris marked the entrances, the loathsome stink of those who dwell below wafting upwards in a noxious fume. No animal was too base for the cave dwellers to feast upon. The husks of centipedes mingling with the skeletons of rats and the carcasses of stock spiders. The bodies of men and all his kindred creatures were scattered upon the offal heaps, though these bore the marks of a more abhorrent appetite. Flesh was cut, burned, and scarred, and organs ripped from still living beasts, and diseased rite and ritual. The debased worship of Neglin, the abhorrent crow god of the hung. However great the famine, none but the bloated demon flies fed upon the wreckage of the sacrifices. Even the hungriest scavengers shunning bodies marked with the puckered pox rune of the plague god. As the night engulfed the eerie silence of the desert, the tunnels spewed forth their wretched inhabitants. Scrawny with privation or bloated with disease, they scrabbled from their holes, scraps of black cloth striving to cover their leprous frames. Most wore masks of bone held together with strips of sinew and leather. Each crude helm a rough representation of a crow skull. Even those without masks bore the image of their god upon them, their flesh cut and torn to display the pox rune. As they emerged from their holes, the sickly throng was faced with their image, reflected 1,000 times, from the facets of the crystal spires and the shimmering wreck of the shard sand. Every night of their lives, the tribesmen emerged from the festering darkness to be confronted by their own diseased images, reminded by the silent mockery of the mountains what they were, how far from the shape of man they had fallen. Anguish stabbed into their hearts, the bitter misery of something lost and forsaken. Their pain filled them, turning to envious hate. Nothing deserved to live whole and pure. Whatever walked or crawled upon the land must be as vile as they were. They would bring the cursed touch of Neglin to anything that strayed too near the desert of mirrors, destroying its blasphemous health with the taint of corruption. Hate was the only thing left to them, the only thing to nourish them in their misery. It was the gift of Neglin to his children, the gift of life where all should be death. In return, the crow god asked only for their flesh, flesh to decay and infest with his noxious blessings. The Vek Hung had been horsemen once, like all the tribes of the Hung, but no longer. They had been drawn to the beauty of the desert of mirrors, had thought to dwell within its fabulous valleys. None had known the plague that was hidden behind the beauty. the corruption that lurked within the crystal spires and the shard sand. Their horses had died, struck down by the taint. The Wei Kung had not been so lucky. So men have souls to amuse the gods, while beasts have none. In their dreams, the shamans of the Wei Kung had seen the crow god, had heard his bubbling voice promise them life and sanctuary, if only they would bow to him and accept his blessings. In their despair, the tribe had accepted the god's terrible offer. Generations later, the once proud horse warriors had become diseased troglodytes, cowering from the sun in their holes. Their lives consumed by the endless struggle for sustenance upon the desert and the endless struggle to feed the spectral hunger of their god. The tribesmen stared at the moon, letting their eyes adjust to the bright silvery disk. After the gloom of their burrows, even the moon was dazzlingly bright. For few among the Wei Kung could still endure the full sun for all but the briefest span. Sickle-bladed swords and brutal axes of bone and copper filled the Wei Kung's hand. As they turned away from the moon, the hours of darkness were few, and there were many to feed in the tunnels. Such game as the desert offered was scant, but the tribesmen knew it would have to be stalked and found. There was never enough to lay stores against famine, and when hunger came to the Wei Kung, it was solved in the manner it had always been solved, by sacrificing those of the tribe who could no longer feed Neglin. The warriors whispered their fawning prayers to the crow god, so that they would find game this night. Each man knew that when the starving times came upon the tribe, those first to feed Neglin were the hunters who returned empty-handed. The ragged throng of the Wei Kung slowly spread across the desert, wading through the piled dunes of shard sand, their eyes watching the glass for any sign of disturbance. Sometimes they would stop digging into the sand with gloved hands to root out a centipede or a scorpion. The sting of such creatures stabbed ineffectually against the leprous flesh of the hunters. There was little pain. The touch of Neglin could still be felt. Besides the cancerous blessing of the crow god, the venom of a scorpion was as docile as a soft caress. As the pestilential warriors spread through the desert of mirrors, they spied a strange thing. A lone rider was heading into the shimmering landscape. A solitary warrior mounted upon some fantastic beast. The stink of blood was on the stranger, so powerful that even at such a distance it was able to overcome the reek of the Wei Kung's bodies and imprint itself upon their senses. The warriors hissed and gibbered, excited by the prospect of such easy prey. The beast they would carve into for their fires. The man would be carved upon the altar for Neglin. Excitement passed in a silent pulse through the desert, drawing dozens of warriors to the ambush being laid by those who had first spotted the rider. They quickly lent their efforts to the attack. Masters of the desert, the Wei Kung knew how to find concealment even in the mirrored expanse, using the spires to cast deceptive reflections to misdirect their prey. Many times, overly bold scouts of the Kurgan and the Hung tribes had fallen victim to the deceit of the desert and those who knew how to exploit it. The tactics that had consumed the entire war bands would make short work of a solitary horseman. Spiteful smiles twisted the broken faces of the Wei Kung behind their bone masks. Surely a horseman was a gift from the crow god, a blessing for their beneficent patron. The first misgivings began to spread when the strange, lopping trot of the rider's steed became evident. The beast he rode was no horse, nor any kind of creature the Wei Kung knew from experience or legend. In shape, it was something like a wolf, but it moved like a reptile. Its hide was shaggy and black beneath its moon. Its belly scaled and bright. A long barbed tail lashed the ground behind it as it ran, and monstrous dewclaws gouged the ground beneath its feet. Sword-like horns protruded from its wolfish head, stabbing the ground over its neck. The stink of blood and slaughter was upon it, the carrion scent of battle and its leavings. Upon the beast's back, his armored bulk filling a bronze saddle, sat a huge warrior in dark armor. The man's head was hidden behind a grotesque skull face helm, antlers rising from its sides, forming the war rune of Khorne. In one hand, the warrior held a massive chain, which was fastened around the neck of his steed. In the other, he gripped a long fang of solid darkness that smoked and fumed, a sword that looked to have been torn from the heart of the moonless night. An aura of menace joined the blood stink of the beast as the Vekung saw the sword, the innate fear of prey when it hears the tread of a predator. Anxiously, the Vekung kept to their hiding places, waiting for the sinister stranger to enter their domain and fall into their trap. Fearsome as he seemed, the Vekung feared their chieftain, Bleda, more. The Khan would not be pleased if they allowed an intruder to invade their lands. Better to stand their ground and face the enemy where they had numbers and terrain to their advantage. However favored he might be by Khorne, whatever strength the blood god might have invested in him, there was no escape for the stranger. Dozens of tribesmen were already waiting for him, every moment bringing in more drifting into positions from deeper in the desert. By the time the paws of his steed touched the charred sand, 100 Vekung would be waiting for him. Even if he was a powerful war chief, the stranger could hardly hope to kill them all.